On the night of March 10, 1945, at 2 o'clock in the morning, something unimaginable unfolded in Tokyo's Nihonbashi district. An emergency coordinator, his hand barely steadying his pencil, recorded words in the district log that would echo in the memories of those who survived the nightmare. A rain of fire. The very atmosphere around us is ablaze. From his headquarters window he witnessed a spectacle that instantly dispelled the fog of 4 years of wartime propaganda disseminated by the Japanese government. From American B-29 bombers, white-hot embers rained down like a sinister snow. Each ember, upon impact, transformed into a surging stream of liquid flame that spread across the streets, climbed walls, and leaped from one building to another with inexplicable persistence. The M69 napalm incendiary bombs, designed to create hellish temperatures of 982 degrees Celsius, 1800 degrees Fahrenheit, brought the water in the canals to a boil and generated their own ominous weather phenomena. In the Shitamachi district, where over 1 million people huddled in fragile wooden and paper homes, with a population density reaching 103,000 people per square mile, American forces unleashed the full might of the most destructive air attack in human history. Thus, on a night that portended unimaginable horror, 279 Boeing B-29 Superfortress bombers, taking to the air as part of an impressive armada of 325 aircraft, unleashed their deadly cargo upon the Japanese capital. These giants of the sky, stripped of defensive armament to maximize bomb load, dropped 1,665 tons of incendiary bombs containing 500,000 individual M69 bomblets on Tokyo, turning a 3-by-4-mile rectangle of the city into a blazing inferno. Up until this fateful moment, the Japanese government had assured its citizens of the capital's impregnability, convincing them that American bombers could not reach Tokyo and that fire brigades were ready to handle any threat. But no one suspected that this night would mark a point of profound psychological transformation in Japanese history, mercilessly shattering all illusions of invincibility, American capabilities, and the very nature of modern warfare. The mathematics of Japan's destruction, it turned out, were not written in blood and steel on distant Pacific islands, but in the rivers of fire that engulfed Tokyo's streets, in temperatures that instantly reduced human bodies to ash, and in the inexorable statistics of American factories, which would soon reveal the utter hopelessness of Japanese resistance. The inevitable collapse had begun long before, though few in Japan realized it. By the end of 1944, B-29 Superfortress strategic bombers had begun their deadly work from airfields in the Mariana Islands, Saipan, Tinian, and Guam. These islands, wrested from the Japanese in bloody battles that summer, were located just 1,500 miles away, 400 kilometers from Tokyo, allowing the newest American bombers to reach the Japanese home islands. In anticipation of the approaching storm, Major General Curtis LeMay assumed command of the 21st Bomber Command on January 20th, 1945. LeMay, seasoned in the crucible of the European bombing campaign, inherited a precision bombing program that unfortunately was not living up to its expectations. High-altitude bombing from 30,000 feet to 944 meters showed dismal accuracy, less than 5%. The reason was a meteorological phenomenon recently discovered by the Americans, a high-altitude jet stream with wind speeds reaching 250 meters, 400 km/h, which deflected bombs significantly off target. The B-29s themselves, technological marvels costing $639,000 each, dollars equivalent to $11 million today, suffered from systematic engine failures at high altitudes. The right-side R3350 engines, the most powerful production aircraft engines at the time, had an unfortunate tendency to catch fire during long ascents. By January 1945, American aviation faced a troubling statistic. The number of B-29 bombers lost due to technical malfunctions exceeded losses from enemy fire. However, the true blow to Japanese defenses was not delivered by aviation, but by the achievements of American chemical science. At Harvard University, beginning in 1942, a team of researchers led by Dr. Louis Fieser worked on a task specifically oriented towards Japan. Scientists considered that about 90% of buildings in Tokyo were constructed from wood, bamboo, and paper. Traditional incendiary bombs, containing magnesium or thermite, burned brightly but briefly. Fieser proposed a fundamentally different solution. A sticky jelly-like gasoline capable of adhering to any surface and burning for up to half an hour. The formula for this substance proved surprisingly simple: aluminum salts of naphthenic and palmitic acids mixed with gasoline. The resulting compound was named napalm, from the first syllables of the acids in its composition. Completing the formula's development on February 14, 1942, Fieser created one of the most formidable weapons of the 20th century. Notably, Standard Oil Development, in conjunction with the Office of Scientific Research and Development, began designing the M69 delivery system as early as October 1941, 2 months before the attack on Pearl Harbor. This fact indicates that American military strategists had foreseen the need to destroy Japanese cities by fire well in advance. The triumph of American military might began not in the skies over the Japanese islands, but in the desolate expanses of the Utah desert. It was there, at the Dugway Proving Ground, that U.S. Army engineers meticulously recreated fragments of Japanese cities. These models, scrupulously reproducing every detail, from tatami mats on the floor to sliding paper doors and specific types of wood, were built under the direction of German architect Erich Mendelssohn, a Jewish émigré who had fled the Nazi regime. Tests conducted throughout 1943 revealed data that would have horrified the Japanese command had they known. It was discovered that just one 500-pound, jumbled approximately 227 coulombs M69 incendiary cluster bomb could reliably ignite fires over an area of 2,500 square feet, about 232 SQM. Upon impact, the napalm gel sprayed in all directions, scattering burning clumps up to 100 feet, about 30 many. But the most terrifying aspect was that this fire could not be extinguished with water. The burning gel simply floated on the surface, continuing to incinerate everything around it, rendering traditional Japanese firefighting methods utterly useless. Lieutenant Colonel Robert McNamara, then a statistical analyst for the U.S. Army Air Forces, performed calculations that showed the available B-29 bombers could completely destroy 68 Japanese cities. His analytical report, presented to General LeMay in February 1945, convincingly demonstrated that shifting from high-altitude precision bombing to low-altitude massive incendiary attacks would increase destructive effectiveness by a colossal 500%. Meanwhile, a dangerous underestimation of the impending threat prevailed within the Japanese command. Colonel Shigeo Nakajima, who headed Tokyo's air defense, later admitted his short-sightedness. We naively believed that American aviation would continue its tactic of high-altitude daylight bombings, similar to those used in Europe. The possibility of massive nighttime raids using incendiary bombs was not even seriously considered by us. On February 25, 1945, the first firestorm erupted over Tokyo, a sinister precursor of what was to come. 231 B-29 bombers dropped 453 tons of incendiary bombs on the city, targeting an area of about 1 square mile, 2.5 square kilometers. This monstrous strike destroyed 28,000 buildings, and 3,000 people perished in the flames. This raid served as a test for General LeMay, who sought to determine whether the Japanese air defense system could effectively counter low-altitude incendiary attacks. The next day, police photographer Koyo Ishikawa, documenting the aftermath of the devastating raid, witnessed an unprecedented phenomenon. The fire was not merely destroying buildings, it was generating its own wind systems, creating deadly vortices. Gigantic incandescent tornadoes formed in several places, he wrote in his report, sucking entire blocks into a fiery abyss. The Japanese command's reaction to the American bombings revealed profound miscalculations in understanding the new threat. General Masakazu Kawabe, Deputy Chief of the Army General Staff, dismissively referred to the initial raids as nothing more than annoyances. He self-confidently assured Emperor Hirohito that Tokyo's robust fire department, comprising 8,000 personnel organized into neighborhood brigades, could easily handle any incendiary attacks by American bombers. The government, in turn, launched a campaign to prepare civilians for firefighting, distributing wooden buckets and sand, and organizing daily drills where housewives practiced extinguishing flames with wet mops. However, all these measures proved utterly insufficient in the face of an effective intelligence network that provided American airmen with precise targeting. In a tragic irony, valuable assistance in target identification came from Japanese Americans, recruited from internment camps. They translated captured documents, identifying industrial facilities skillfully camouflaged among residential areas. Sergeant Ben Kuroku, who flew 58 combat missions despite his family being forcibly placed in a camp, later recalled, "We knew the location of every small factory, every hidden workshop tucked away in someone's home." The Japanese naively believed that dispersing industrial enterprises would protect them. But in the end, it only gave General LeMay justification for destroying entire cities with fire. On March 9, 1945, at 5:35 p.m. local time, the first B-29 bomber, named Dauntless Doty, lifted off from Northfield on Guam. Over the next 2 hours and 45 minutes, 325 more superfortresses took off from 3 Pacific islands, Guam, Saipan, and Tinian. This aerial fleet set course for Tokyo to execute the largest raid in the history of military aviation. General LeMay made a series of drastic decisions that fundamentally altered the nature of the mission. First, all defensive armament, except for the tail guns, along with their crews and ammunition, was removed from the bombers. This significantly increased the bomb load. Second, it was decided to conduct bombings at night from an altitude of 5,000 to 7,000 feet, from 500 to 2,100 meters. This maneuver allowed them to evade enemy radar and heavy anti-aircraft fire. Third, each aircraft carried 40 cluster bombs, filled with 1,420 M69 incendiary bomblets, doubling the standard bomb load. Advanced Pathfinder aircraft, reaching Tokyo at 08 on March 10, used napalm bombs to mark the target in the shape of a gigantic flaming cross. The main force, following the Pathfinders, dropped its deadly cargo according to a pre-calculated pattern, creating a ring of fire designed to cut off escape routes for the city's residents. Sergeant James C.R., the tail gunner, anxiously watched the initial bomb strikes. At first it seemed to him that silvery snow was falling from the sky, but moments later each bomb transformed into a raging fire source about 10 feet 3 meters in diameter. Soon thousands of these fiery spots merged, forming flaming rivers that surged through the city streets. Unfavorable weather conditions, specifically strong ground winds blowing from the southwest at 45 to 67 mph, 72 to 108 km/h, played a fateful role in the tragedy unfolding in Tokyo. These natural air currents, combined with the powerful convection currents generated by the firestorm, created a truly apocalyptic scene. Bomber pilots flying over Tokyo Bay witnessed an incredible spectacle. Solid walls of fire rising up to 300 feet, only 91 meters high. The fire seemed to gain a will of its own, creating its own weather system, a phenomenon scientists later termed a firestorm. The superheated air rose with such force that it generated hurricane-force winds at ground level, sucking oxygen from shelters while simultaneously fueling the flames with a fresh supply of air. Robert Morgan, a B-29 pilot already known for his participation in European operations aboard the famed Memphis Belle, recalled the terrifying power of the inferno at an altitude of about 5,000 feet, 400 meters. The updrafts of hot air were so violent that they tossed his 63-ton bomber like an autumn leaf. According to Morgan, the turbulence in the sky over Tokyo surpassed even the most intense anti-aircraft fire he had encountered over Germany. The Shitamachi district, chosen as the target, was not only a densely populated residential area, but also a hub of thousands of small workshops supplying the Japanese war machine with necessary components. After the daring Doolittle raid in 1942, the Japanese government, seeking to protect production from American bombings, deliberately dispersed industrial capabilities. However, this decision inadvertently provided General LeMay with justification for striking entire residential blocks. Staff Sergeant Carl Barold, a radio operator, closely monitored Japanese civil defense frequencies. Initially, organized communications could be heard, fire teams coordinating their actions. But within just half an hour, chaos reigned on the airwaves, replaced by panicked screams, and then an ominous silence. One by one, radio stations ceased their broadcasts, plunging into stillness. The tragic night in Tokyo surpassed the most pessimistic expectations. The hellish firestorm that engulfed the city reached incredible intensity. At the very heart of the blaze, temperatures soared to 800 degrees, hot enough to liquefy glass and aluminum. The Sumida River, which seemed like salvation for those fleeing the flames, boiled. The city's streets, covered in asphalt, turned into a viscous mass, trapping those who desperately tried to escape. By 2:30 a.m., just 2.5 hours after the bombing began, the scale of destruction had surpassed all Japanese conceptions of war. Police reports compiled later attested to chaotic attempts to organize evacuation, revealing a complete lack of preparedness for such a catastrophe. One district commander bitterly stated, "We prepared for ordinary fires when fire spreads from one building to another." But this was something different. Fire erupted everywhere simultaneously. It fell from the heavens, flowed through the streets like water, leaped over fire breaks that we considered impregnable. But the most devastating blow to Japanese understanding was the behavior of the M69 cluster bombs. Upon impact, each one scattered burning napalm within a 100-foot pumped 30-meter radius, covering everything with sticky fire that could not be extinguished with water. Firefighters watched in horror as their hoses only helped spread the burning gel, turning an already terrible fire into an uncontrollable inferno. At the epicenter of the tragedy unfolding in Tokyo, Dr. Kubota Shigenori, who was leading the rescue operation, horrifyingly documented phenomena that seemed inconceivable from the perspective of physics. He noted that people spontaneously combusted without direct contact with the flames, their clothing igniting from the unbearable radiant heat. Families, naively believing they had escaped, suddenly turned to ash dozens of yards from the raging inferno. At the same time, American bomber pilots encountered an equally astonishing sight. Lieutenant John Saar, who operated the bomb site, was stunned. The thermal column was so powerful that our altimeters registered it. Our altitude should have been 5,000 feet, but the heat lifted us to 7,000, even 8,000 feet. The city had become a giant furnace. When dawn broke on March 10, the scale of destruction defied all imagination. Photographs taken from F-35 reconnaissance aircraft, which were modified B-29s, showed that 15.8 square miles, Puna about 40. 9 square kilometers of Tokyo had been destroyed by fire. But the most horrifying aspect was something else. Entire sections of the city had simply vanished. Not damaged, not burned, but completely wiped off the face of the earth. These images shocked American photo analysts. The tragedy descended upon Japanese soil, leaving an indelible mark on history. According to Japanese police reports discovered after the war, the death toll was appalling. 83,793 people died, and these were only the confirmed figures. Authorities acknowledged that the actual number of victims was significantly higher, as many bodies were incinerated in the flames. In addition to human losses, the catastrophe destroyed 297,181 buildings, leaving over 1 million people homeless and destitute. However, the dry statistics could not convey the full depth of the psychological trauma inflicted by the tragedy. Masako Tsujiya, a 16-year-old girl who survived by hiding in a water tank as fire raged around her, recalled emerging to find her neighborhood gone. There was nothing left to serve as a landmark, no streets, just gray ash stretching to the horizon. I couldn't understand where my house used to stand. All my acquaintances were dead or missing, she recounted. Civil authority was paralyzed. The Tokyo Fire Department, which had previously assured citizens of its ability to cope with any raid's aftermath, virtually ceased to exist as an organized force in just 2 hours. Of the 8,000 firefighters, over 1,000 died on the first night, and hundreds more suffered severe burns. Their equipment, consisting mainly of hand pumps and wooden ladders, proved utterly useless against the destructive power of napalm. Following the tragic events of March 10th, Tokyo plunged into chaos, revealing severe shortcomings in Japan's emergency preparedness system. Authorities were completely unprepared for a disaster of such magnitude, leading to improvised morgues in schools, temples, and parks. The scene that unfolded before the eyes of even hardened officials was so horrifying it surpassed all their expectations. Mass cremations began, but the psychological wounds inflicted on survivors proved no less profound than the physical destruction. Yoshiko Hashimoto, desperately searching for her mother among thousands of bodies, recounted scenes that were impossible to comprehend. All the bodies were charred and shrunken to the size of children. It was impossible to distinguish men from women, adults from children. Some bodies were fused in embraces, like families who had met death together. The government's sluggishness became evident. Emperor Hirohito, who visited the devastated areas on March 18th, was deeply shaken by what he saw. Makito, his aide, recorded, "His Majesty remained silent for a long time, then uttered, 'Tokyo has become a field of ashes. The capital of the empire has become a field of ashes.'" Despite the monstrous destruction caused by the Tokyo raid, Japan's military and political leadership did not immediately recognize the need to revise its strategy. Instead, the government issued orders to increase the production of bamboo spear rifles for the civilian population in preparation for an anticipated American invasion. Concurrently, authorities severely suppressed the dissemination of information about the true scale of the tragedy that had struck the capital. Mass media outlets were strictly forbidden from publishing any details about the number of casualties or photographs depicting the aftermath of the devastation. The systematic and methodical destruction of Japanese cities was carried out according to a meticulously planned strategy. As early as March 11th, with the fires in Tokyo still raging, 285 B-29 bombers unleashed a deadly payload on Nagoya, a crucial hub for Japan's aviation industry. The Mitsubishi plant, responsible for producing approximately 40% of the aircraft engines used by the Japanese Air Force, was subjected to a massive bombardment involving 938 tons of incendiary bombs, causing widespread devastation. Tanaka Hidoshi, a factory worker, watched in horror from a nearby hill as his workplace was reduced to ashes. American planes dropped incendiary bombs with incredible precision, like farmers planting rice seedlings. Each bomb created its own fire, and these squares of flame merged into one huge blazing ocean. In just about 20 minutes, factories that took years to build were wiped off the face of the earth. This campaign was distinguished by its ruthless industrial logic, aimed at undermining Japan's military-industrial potential. Osaka, Japan's second-largest city and the heart of its textile industry, endured a massive assault by 274 B-29 bombers on March 13th. This raid obliterated approximately 21 square kilometers of urban area, including 134 military factories. Kobe, a vital port and shipbuilding center, lost about 18.1 square kilometers on March 16th. A toll that included the Kawasaki submarine shipyards and aircraft factories. The astonishing precision with which the Americans selected their targets pointed to the existence of an extensive intelligence network, one the Japanese were entirely unaware of. Small workshops cleverly disguised within residential neighborhoods, unmarked factories housed in converted schools, and even private homes where families assembled aircraft components, all were systematically destroyed. After the war, investigations revealed that American intelligence, drawing upon pre-war business archives and the assistance of Japanese-American translators, had painstakingly created a detailed map of Japan's entire industrial infrastructure. By April 1945, the cumulative effect of the massive bombing raids had induced a state among the civilian population that Japanese military psychiatrists termed spiritual collapse. Post-war findings from secret police reports indicate a growing decline in morale within Japanese society. Citizens increasingly voiced doubts about the emperor's infallibility, particularly in light of his inability to protect the country from American bombings. Lieutenant General Noru Tadzoi, commander of Air Defense Forces, admitted in a post-war interrogation that the March raids marked a turning point for him. It became evident that victory was impossible, as American air power could destroy any city at will, and no effective defense against night incendiary attacks existed. However, the most painful blow to Japanese morale came from American leaflets distributed before the bombings. Initially dismissed as propaganda, it soon became clear that they predicted future targets with astonishing accuracy. The psychological effect of realizing inevitable destruction and the impossibility of preventing it proved devastating. Dr. Masao Maruyama, a political scientist who survived the bombings, later observed that the leaflets undermined the traditional concept of death in battle. What was happening was no longer war, but rather a planned extermination. The Americans openly declared their intention to burn Japanese cities, and that is precisely what occurred. According to Maruyama, the Japanese were not defeated in battle. They were processed, meaning subjected to systematic destruction. Statistical data on the scale of the military campaign plunged the Japanese command into disarray. After the overwhelming firestorm in March, which incinerated 83 square kilometers in 10 days, General LeMay systematically flattened Japanese cities. By May, with the largest metropolises in ruins, the focus of the bombings shifted to secondary targets. 58 cities, with populations ranging from 60,000 to 350,000 people. On May 29th, 517 B-29 bombers, accompanied by 101 P-51 Mustang fighters, taking off from the recently captured Iwo Jima, delivered a crushing blow to Yokohama. This audacious raid dealt another psychological blow to the Japanese, American fighters in the skies over Japan, something military propagandists had persistently denied, assuring citizens of the impossibility of such a scenario. The presence of escort fighters meant B-29s could bomb targets with impunity in broad daylight. The scale of destruction escalated exponentially, outstripping Japan's capacity for resistance. In May alone, American aviation reduced 243 square kilometers of urban territory to ashes. In June, the fiery inferno obliterated another 230 square kilometers. By July, the B-29s had virtually no untouched targets left, forcing strategists to revisit already scorched cities to eradicate even hints of recovery efforts. August 1945 marked the zenith of American military production, showcasing its impressive might. In an unprecedented operation, 836 B-29 bombers descended upon 4 Japanese cities. Hachioji, located west of Tokyo and home to 80,000 residents, was virtually wiped off the map, losing 80% of its territory in a single night. Toyama, a major aluminum production center, suffered an even more tragic fate. The city was 99.5% destroyed, becoming the most devastated populated area of the entire war. Alongside the vast scale of the campaign, individual eyewitness accounts revealed the horrifying human cost of industrial warfare. Katsumoto Saoto, a boy who survived the Tokyo bombing at age 12, dedicated his life to collecting and documenting survivors' stories. By 2002, he had gathered over 1,000 testimonies, striving to preserve the voices often ignored by official history. Haruyo Nihi, an 8-year-old girl who survived the March 10 raid, provided one of the most poignant descriptions of those events. In a panic, attempting to escape with her family, she lost them in the chaos. The wind was so strong it lifted people into the air. I saw a woman with a child on her back suddenly burst into flames. The child screamed in terror. Then, in an instant, both went silent, turning into black silhouettes falling to the ground. Tragedy befell the civilians as the firestorm engulfed the city. One survivor, whose name became a symbol of resilience, narrowly escaped certain death only through a combination of chance and self-sacrifice. Her father, in the chaos of the night, shielded her with his body from falling burning debris, becoming a living shield. The bodies of other people covered them, mitigating the scorching heat. I heard prayers and screams above us, and then a sinister silence. When dawn broke, we crawled out, covered in the remains of those who saved us, she recalled. The psychological scars of that night haunted survivors for decades. Shizuyo Takuchi, who was only 14 at the time of the bombing, shared her experiences. For many years, I couldn't light a match without trembling. The smell of roasted meat made me nauseous. Orange sunsets filled me with panic. We physically survived, but spiritually we never escaped that night. The medical system's response to the massive bombings exposed its complete unpreparedness for such a disaster. Dr. Shigenori Kubota, who led the rescue operation on March 10th, documented unprecedented injuries. We saw people with burned lungs, suffering burns from the superheated air. They were alive but couldn't breathe. Others burned alive in shelters where temperatures exceeded 400 degrees C. Our training didn't account for anything like this. The few surviving hospitals were overwhelmed within hours. Surgical instruments ran out instantly. Burn centers designed for dozens of patients received thousands. Medical personnel were forced to make agonizing decisions, focusing on those with any chance of survival and leaving the severely wounded to die in agony. At the Tokyo Imperial University Hospital, Nurse Takahashi Aiko left a heartbreaking record, testifying to the catastrophic lack of resources. Morphine supplies ran out within an hour, and bandages within 2. Desperately trying to help the wounded, hospital staff were forced to use their own uniforms as dressing material. The incessant screams of pain haunted the nurse even in her sleep, when she finally collapsed from exhaustion after 2 days. Beyond the immense number of direct casualties, the bombings triggered a widespread public health crisis. Destroyed water systems and decomposing bodies in the ruins created ideal conditions for the spread of infectious diseases. Typhus, dysentery, and respiratory infections rapidly spread in overcrowded refugee centers. In these conditions, the government focused on maintaining military strength, allocated extremely limited funds for civilian medical aid. The destructive bombings were preceded by an intelligence operation of unprecedented scale. In Washington, a special task force spent 2 years meticulously analyzing the infrastructure of Japanese cities, utilizing pre-war insurance maps, tourist guides, and business directories. Intelligence had data on the location of every significant factory, the layout of all major cities, and even the construction materials used in various districts. Valuable information was provided by Japanese Americans, recruited from internment camps. Sergeant Roy Matsumoto, whose family was confined in a camp in Jerome, Arkansas, while he served in Burma, recalled how they translated captured documents containing information about the relocation of industrial enterprises. Even minor details, such as a deceased soldier's diary mentioning his sister working in an underground workshop producing aircraft parts, were carefully recorded and included in target folders. intelligence played a crucial role in preparing the devastating air attacks on the Japanese islands. The Office of Strategic Services, OSS, actively used its agents in neutral countries to gather information on Japanese industry. These agents meticulously studied shipping manifests and trade documents, identifying production volumes and key sectors. Information provided by Swedish businessman Vidar Bagg, who secretly collaborated with American intelligence, was of particular value. His detailed reports on synthetic oil production in Japan form the basis for selecting bombing targets. Equally important to the success was the skill of American cryptanalysts in deciphering Japanese military communications. Throughout the campaign, they obtained valuable information on the location of air defense systems, night fighter bases, and even instances where fuel shortages forced Japanese interceptors to remain grounded. This intelligence allowed General LeMay to bypass enemy defenses and strike at moments of greatest vulnerability. Meteorologists also contributed to the destructive power of the American bombings. They learned to predict optimal weather conditions for firestorms, low humidity, strong winds, and clear skies. Raids were planned to coincide with these conditions, significantly enhancing the spread of fire. For instance, the success of the March 10 Tokyo raid was largely due to an accurate forecast of strong southwest winds, which facilitated the development of the firestorm. Captain Robert Nelson, chief meteorologist of the 21st Bomber Command, emphasized that they deliberately used weather conditions as a weapon, transforming individual fires into one giant fiery inferno. The Japanese leadership, lacking advanced meteorological services, could not anticipate the optimal conditions for a firestorm. They invariably applied the same civil defense protocols, ignoring the fact that certain weather conditions made firefighting virtually impossible. The Americans, conversely, cleverly exploited weather conditions for their own purposes. They intentionally conducted diversionary raids in unfavorable weather, forcing Japanese air defense forces to remain on high alert even during storms. As a result, when ideal conditions for a firestorm arose, Japanese defenses were weakened by a series of false alarms. By July 1945, American incendiary bombings had achieved their strategic objective, the complete suppression of Japanese civilian morale and the destruction of the country's industrial capacity. Secret police reports indicated that only 32% of the civilian population believed Japan could achieve even a semblance of victory. Military production had plummeted to 15% of 1944 levels. Over 8.5 million people were left homeless, forced to live in temporary shelters or flee to rural areas. The atomic strikes on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, despite their unprecedented nature, claimed fewer lives than the incendiary bombing campaign. The total number of dead in Hiroshima, 146,000, and Nagasaki, 80,000, was lower than the casualties from conventional bombings, estimated at 330,000 to 900,000 people. Nevertheless, it was the combination of these factors, the demonstration of America's unlimited capabilities in using both conventional means of destruction and fundamentally new weapons, that ultimately convinced Emperor Hirohito to decide on surrender. In his historic speech on August 15, 1945, announcing Japan's surrender, Emperor Hirohito specifically highlighted a new and most cruel bomb, referring to atomic weapons. However, as revealed in his private conversations, what impressed him most was the systematic destruction of Japanese cities by massive conventional bombings. According to his aide's diary, the emperor admitted that American incendiary bombs had demonstrated the possibility of completely destroying Japan without the need for an invasion. The atomic bombing, therefore, merely accelerated the country's destruction. It is worth noting that the B-29 bomber campaign was an unprecedented industrial project in history at that time. A colossal $3 billion was allocated to this program, which in modern currency amounts to approximately $50 billion, more than the cost of the famous Manhattan Project. 4 major plants owned by Boeing, Bell, Martin and Fisher produced a total of 3,170 B-29 aircraft. Each of these bombers consisted of 55,000 proprietary parts and 8,000 additional components purchased from third-party suppliers. The creation of each aircraft required 2,000 engineering drawings and 100,000 man-hours of labor. Despite certain technical issues, the Wright R3350 engines represented the pinnacle of engineering in piston engines, 18 cylinders, each delivering 2,200 horsepower, provided the B-29 with a range of 3,250 miles, with a bomb load of up to 20,000 pounds. Logistical triumphs kept pace with industrial ones. The construction of airfields on Saipan, Tinian and Guam required the colossal movement of 11 million cubic yards of earth and coral. North Field on Tinian became the largest in the world, sprawling with 6 8,500-foot runways ready to accommodate 269 B-29 bombers. Engineers laid 15,000 miles of communication lines and erected fuel storage facilities capable of holding 16 million gallons of aviation gasoline. The mere existence of this infrastructure in the middle of the vast Pacific Ocean served as a visible embodiment of American power, far surpassing any Japanese comprehension. Admiral Soemu Toyoda later admitted, "We were unable to build a single usable airfield on islands we had held for decades. The Americans, however, built dozens on islands they had just captured and in the midst of fighting." The atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki should be viewed in the context of the unrelenting incendiary bombing campaign. By August 1945, 66 Japanese cities lay in ruins. The nuclear weapon, while revolutionary in terms of physics, was essentially an evolutionary step in strategy. Colonel Paul Tibbets, who piloted the Enola Gay, had previously participated in conventional raids. He later remarked that the atomic bomb was cleaner, quicker, but not necessarily more destructive than the incendiary raids. The destruction in Tokyo on March 10th surpassed the aftermath of Hiroshima after August 6th. The initial reaction of the Japanese military to Hiroshima demonstrated their stunned acceptance of urban-scale destruction. Many leaders initially believed it was just another incendiary raid until the horrifying effects of radiation became apparent. General Kawabe's first reaction was one of relief that only one plane was involved, which he believed meant America could not have a large supply of such weapons. Atomic bombs, above all, provided efficiency, the destruction of an entire city by a single aircraft rather than hundreds. The campaign of massive bombings against Japanese cities, conducted by the United States Army Air Forces, reached its apex in August 1945. The combined efforts to destroy military-industrial facilities and civilian infrastructure led to catastrophic consequences, forcing the Japanese leadership to reconsider its strategy for continuing the war. The effectiveness of these bombings, compounded by the horrifying consequences of the atomic strikes that claimed the lives of many survivors in the ensuing weeks, finally convinced Japanese hardliners of the futility of further resistance. The decision to surrender which was discussed in the Supreme Council for the Direction of the War, was largely dictated by this campaign of destructive bombings. Admiral Mitsumasa Yonai, who served as Navy Minister, emphasized that B-29s have already reduced most of our cities to ruins. The atomic bomb merely made the destruction more widespread. We cannot find defense against either. General Korichika Anami, who held the position of War Minister and was one of the staunchest opponents of surrender, received alarming intelligence that American incendiary arsenals allowed them to level every city and town in Japan. His intelligence staff concluded that at current production rates, the United States could sustain the bombing campaign indefinitely. Prince Fumimaro Konoe's words to Emperor Hirohito became the most compelling argument for surrender. American bombings have deprived Japan of the ability to continue the war. Further resistance will lead not to defeat, but to the complete annihilation of the country. Every week of delay will mean the disappearance of yet another city from the face of the earth. On August 10, 1945, during the crucial Imperial Conference, Hirohito made the historic decision: I can no longer bear the suffering of my innocent people. Continuing the war will only lead to further bloodshed. When American occupation forces landed in Japan in September 1945, they were confronted with a horrifying scene of total destruction, the scale of which exceeded all expectations. General Douglas MacArthur's headquarters, seemingly stunned by what they witnessed, reported that approximately 40% of the country's urban areas had been reduced to ruins. In 66 cities targeted by relentless bombing, around 2.5 million buildings were obliterated, leaving millions homeless and destitute. Industrial production, once Japan's pride, plummeted to a mere 10% of its pre-war capacity, plunging the economy into a profound crisis. As Japanese archives were studied, the chilling extent of human losses became apparent. Official figures indicated 330,000 deaths from the massive bombings, yet local authorities, analyzing municipal records, concluded that the number of casualties ranged from 500,000 to 900,000 people. Moreover, millions of Japanese suffered severe injuries that left indelible marks on their lives. Burns, respiratory damage from acrid smoke, and deep psychological trauma all became a harsh reality for those who survived the hell of war. American engineers who arrived to assess the damage were shocked by the results of their own destructive actions. Colonel John Montgomery, inspecting a Tokyo burned to ashes, wrote in horror in his report, "There are areas here of 8 to 10 square miles where absolutely nothing remains. No debris, no foundations, just lifeless grey ash. It resembles the surface of the moon, devoid of any life." Following World War II, a US strategic bombing survey concluded that Japan would likely have surrendered by November 1945, even without the atomic bombs or a military invasion. This finding was based on an assessment of the effectiveness of conventional bombings and a naval blockade, which exerted significant pressure on Japan's economy and military infrastructure. In the decades that followed, survivors of the incendiary bombings united to preserve the memory of their experiences. In 2002, Katsumoto Saotomi founded the Tokyo Air Raid and War Damages Center, an archive now holding over 3,000 eyewitness testimonies. His work brought to light many tragic stories that had long remained outside official historical accounts. Masako Yamada, who lost her entire family in the March 10, 1945 bombing, dedicated 4 decades to collecting and recording the names of victims in her neighborhood. Her handwritten lists, comprising 3,147 names, are now preserved at the Tokyo Peace Museum, immortalizing those whose lives might otherwise have been forgotten. Haruyo Nihei, who survived as a child buried under a pile of bodies, became a peace educator, sharing her memories with over 100,000 students. Her message was always consistent. War is not just numbers in reports or strategic plans on maps. War is a child helplessly watching their mother burn alive in the flames. Eyewitnesses to the tragedy reveal enduring emotional wounds. Survivors recount a lifelong fear of fire, an inability to watch fireworks, and panic attacks triggered by siren sounds used during fire drills. For decades, many remained silent about the horror they endured, the trauma so profound it defied words. The M69 incendiary bomb represented the pinnacle of destructive engineering. Each hexagonal steel canister, 20 inches long, contained 2.6 pounds of napalm gel. Its ingenuity lay in its delivery method. 38 such canisters were packed into an E-46 cluster, which opened at 2,000 feet, scattering the M69s over a wide area. Upon impact, a fuse with a 3 to 5 second delay ignited white phosphorus, which expelled the napalm gel from the bomb's tail. Heated to 800 and 1200 degrees C, the gel shot out in a 100-foot stream, engulfing everything it touched. Napalm burned for 15 to 30 minutes, significantly longer than conventional incendiary mixtures. At the Dugway Proving Ground, meticulous tests perfected the napalm formula. Scientists discovered that adding polystyrene significantly enhanced the adhesive properties of the incendiary substance. By experimenting with various proportions, they achieved an ideal balance between its ability to stick to surfaces and the rapid spread of flames. The cluster bomb dispersal pattern was meticulously calculated for maximum area coverage. Operations research specialists determined that the optimal approach involved using 38 cluster bombs per bundle, dropped along a specific trajectory. This created overlapping zones of fire that within 20 minutes merged into a single massive conflagration. Behind every B-29 bomber sortie lay colossal industrial power, dwarfing Japan's wartime production. Boeing's Wichita plant, spanning 1.6 million square feet, operated 24/7 in 3 shifts, employing 29,000 people. During peak production, a B-29 rolled off the assembly line every 90 minutes. The supply chain spanned across America. Engines came from Wright Aeronautical in New Jersey, propellers from Hamilton Standard in Connecticut, instruments from Sperry Corporation in New York, and gun turrets from General Electric. Each of these components required its own extensive manufacturing infrastructure. Even aluminum production was a stark testament to American industrial superiority. Building a single B-29 required 60,000 pounds of this metal. The Alcoa plant in Tennessee, powered by the Tennessee Valley Authority, TVA, produced more aluminum in a month than all of Japan did in a year. The electricity consumed to produce this metal exceeded Japan's total national electricity output. The American system for training B-29 bomber crews was streamlined to meet the colossal demands of the war industry. By 1945, training bases in Kansas, Nebraska, and New Mexico were graduating approximately 1,000 crews for these strategic bombers each month. Each crew underwent intensive 6-month training, including an impressive 400 hours of flight time before deploying to the Pacific Theater of Operations. The massive incendiary bombing campaign, spearheaded by General Curtis LeMay, marked a revolution in strategic bombing doctrine. Unlike earlier theories developed by strategists such as Italian General Giulio Douhet and American General Billy Mitchell, which emphasized precision strikes on specific targets, the new strategy demonstrated that widespread area destruction could be more effective, especially against dispersed industries. This campaign validated John Kenneth Galbraith's economic views on dehousing, arguing that destroying workers' housing inflicted greater damage on production than direct bombing of factories themselves. Deprived of shelter, food, and mobility, workers were unable to sustain production even if the factories remained intact. Post-war analysis revealed exceptional strategic foresight employed during the campaign. Bombings aimed at destroying urban residential areas forced the Japanese population into mass evacuations, displacing approximately 8.5 million people to rural areas. This sudden influx of refugees created a humanitarian crisis that depleted resources essential for sustaining war production. The transportation infrastructure, unable to cope with the flow of displaced persons, began to collapse, hindering the delivery of raw materials to surviving factories. The psychological component of the strategy was equally sophisticated. Advance announcement of targets through leaflet drops provoked panic and mass migrations, causing a disorganizing effect on production that exceeded the actual damage from the bombings. Workers abandoned their jobs in cities, threatened by air raids days before attacks commenced. General Curtis LeMay's decision to shift from high-altitude precision bombing to low-altitude area bombing was a turning point in the war and one of the most significant decisions made by a commander. On March 7, 1945, he made this decision unilaterally, without informing his direct superior, General Henry Arnold, before the first raid. LeMay later wrote, "The solution came to me at 2 a.m. Strip the defensive armament, fly at low altitude at night, use only incendiaries." This went against all established principles they had been taught, but the mathematical calculations spoke for themselves. We could either completely destroy Japanese cities or fail by trying to hit individual targets. The personal responsibility and awareness of the consequences weighed heavily on the general. LeMay understood that failure of the raid would lead to a court-martial. He personally briefed each crew, explaining that he was ordering them to fly undefended into the heart of the enemy capital. "If it doesn't work, send me home under escort," he told his staff. The successful execution of the operation confirmed the correctness of his judgment, yet LeMay never boasted about this decision. In his memoirs he wrote, "We knew we were killing a lot of women and children, but if the war had continued, millions would have died in an invasion," said Average. It was simple arithmetic, terrible but inevitable arithmetic. The incendiary bombings had a profound and irreversible impact on Japanese culture and society. The concept of mujo impermanence acquired a new, tragic meaning as entire cities vanished overnight. Traditional architecture, shaped over centuries, proved defenseless against modern warfare. Post-war urban planning reflected the traumatic experience of the bombings. Cities were rebuilt with wide avenues that could serve as firebreaks. Building codes mandated concrete as the primary construction material. Parks were designed as evacuation zones in case of new attacks. Tokyo's modern layout, with its seemingly random open spaces, is a direct consequence of the experience gained from the incendiary bombings. The Japanese language also underwent changes. New words entered everyday usage: Naparudan, napalm bomb; Shidan, incendiary bomb; Higaisha, bombing victim. The expression Yakinohara burned field became synonymous with total destruction. Literature and cinema have grappled with this tragic experience for decades. Writer Kobo Abe, who witnessed bombings in Manchuria, created surreal works exploring themes of identity loss and urban destruction. Post-war films by director Akira Kurosawa often depicted fire as a destructive force, reflecting the national trauma. The legitimacy of massive incendiary attacks continues to spark intense debate among international law experts. The Hague Convention, adopted in 1907, prohibited the bombing of undefended towns. However, the Japanese cities, subjected to devastating raids, possessed military installations and air defense capabilities, which, from a formal perspective, rendered them legitimate targets for attack. The principle of proportionality, which dictates that harm to civilians should not be disproportionate to military advantage, was not clearly defined in 1945. American strategists argued that destroying dispersed military production justified area bombing. Critics, in turn, insisted that deliberately creating firestorms to increase civilian casualties constituted a direct violation of the laws of war. Robert McNamara, who participated in planning the campaign as a statistical analyst, later admitted, "LeMay said that if we had lost the war, we would all have been prosecuted as war criminals, and I think he was right. We behaved as war criminals, but what makes it immoral if you lose, and not immoral if you win?" The Nuremberg and Tokyo trials established new foundations for defining war crimes, but the issue of Allied bombings remained outside their scope. The Geneva Conventions, adopted in 1949, were an attempt to clarify provisions for the protection of civilians, largely in response to the area bombings conducted during World War II. How historical memory preserves the events of the incendiary bombings remains a point of contention between Japan and the United States. In Japanese society, these tragic events are etched in memory as a symbol of sacrifice. Peace museums in Tokyo, Osaka, and other cities serve as repositories for artifacts melted by fire and testimonies from those who endure the horror of those days. Every year, on March 10th, Japan observes Tokyo Peace Day, a day of remembrance and mourning. In American historical memory, the events of the incendiary bombings have been overshadowed, ceding prominence to the more dramatic and unprecedented atomic bombings. Military historians, analyzing these events, emphasize the strategic success of the campaign, which, in their view, contributed to ending the war without the need for an invasion of Japan. The moral dilemmas that tormented Robert McNamara rarely become subjects of widespread public discussion. Survivors like Katsumoto Saotomi tirelessly advocate for recognition of the incendiary bombing tragedy. They argue that the victims of these attacks deserve the same acknowledgement and respect as those who survived the atomic bombings. The Japanese government long showed restraint on this issue, fearing it would complicate its narrative of victimhood and unwilling to displease its American ally. Recently, there has been a trend towards a more balanced assessment of these events. Richard Frank's book, Downfall, argues that the bombings may have prevented even greater losses, saving millions of lives, by making an invasion of the Japanese islands unnecessary. In his book, Japan's Last War, Asia, the Pacific, and the Japanese Sense of an Ending, Mark Selden highlights the deliberate nature of attacks on civilians. This issue continues to provoke intense discussion and remains a subject of dispute. The technological breakthroughs employed in the incendiary bombing campaign profoundly influenced warfare for years to come. Napalm, specifically refined for use in Japan, became a widespread weapon, actively used in Korea and Vietnam. The concept of cluster bombs spurred the development of modern precision munitions. Operations research methods developed for planning raids, including statistical analysis, probability calculations, and system optimization, became firmly embedded in military practice. Robert McNamara, as Secretary of Defense, applied similar analytical approaches in Vietnam, leading to controversial outcomes. Weather forecasting for military operations achieved significant advancements. Methods developed to predict conditions conducive to firestorms contributed substantially to modern meteorology. Understanding the patterns of fire spread, characteristics of urban fires, and thermal effects influenced urban planning and the development of fire safety regulations in many countries worldwide. Despite its contribution to victory in the Pacific, the B-29 bomber quickly became obsolete with the advent of the jet age. Nevertheless, the massive industrial mobilization deployed for its production served as a vivid demonstration of the United States' technological prowess, laying a strong foundation for the future development of the aerospace industry and an ambitious space program. Precise casualty figures resulting from the massive bombings of Japanese cities remain a subject of fierce debate. Yet even documented evidence points to the immense scale of the tragedy. According to data from the U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey, these raids killed at least 330,000 people and wounded 476,000. Japanese government statistics cite an even more horrifying figure of 500,000 deaths. Some historians, considering delayed deaths from burns, carbon monoxide poisoning, and disease, estimate the number to reach 900,000 people. Beyond the enormous human toll, this campaign resulted in 8.5 million refugees, comprising about 30% of Japan's entire urban population. Over 2.5 million buildings were destroyed, and economic damage exceeded 25% of the nation's wealth. Industrial production plummeted to 10% of pre-war levels. The psychological damage inflicted on the population was immeasurable. A post-war study by Dr. Masahiro Yamamoto among 10,000 survivors revealed that 73% suffered from chronic anxiety, 61% complained of recurring nightmares, and 44% exhibited symptoms that would today be diagnosed as post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. The tragic legacy of indiscriminate bombings of Japanese cities extended far beyond physical destruction, leaving deep scars on the psyches of survivors. Post-traumatic stress disorder, like a sinister shadow, haunted those who endured the horror of the firestorms, passed down through distorted family relationships and collective trauma embedded in the nation's cultural memory. The medical consequences of the bombings continued to affect people's health for decades. Increased susceptibility to respiratory diseases due to inhaling toxic smoke, chronic pain from horrific burns, and an alarmingly high incidence of cancer, possibly triggered by exposure to poisonous substances released during the bombings. Unfortunately, the Japanese government did not provide comprehensive medical support to the victims of the incendiary bombings, unlike those affected by the atomic blasts who received special medical benefits. General Curtis LeMay, who commanded the operation, never apologized for his actions, yet he acknowledged the moral dilemma inherent in the incendiary bombings. In his memoirs, he wrote that every soldier must consider the moral implications of their deeds. But war itself is inherently immoral, and if one is overly concerned by this, they would not make a good soldier. However, LeMay's deputy, Brigadier General Thomas Power, offered a more profound reflection, noting that the firebombings killed more Japanese civilians than the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki combined. He admitted they were aware of the consequences of their actions, which aimed to break Japan's will to resist by destroying enough people. While this strategy proved effective, Power questioned the human cost paid for such a victory. The tragic events in Japan left an indelible mark on people's minds, shaping diverse perspectives over the decades. Initially, survivors focused on their identity as victims. Over time, however, some began to acknowledge that Japan's aggressive policies had provoked retaliatory actions from the enemy. Shito Katsumoto, a witness to these events, emphasized that the bombings served as a stark lesson in what modern warfare entails, the complete destruction of civilian society. He urged that such tragedies must never be repeated. American airmen who participated in the raids also experienced a wide range of emotions. Some maintained that the bombings were necessary to expedite the war's end. Others, however, carried a tormenting sense of guilt. Joseph Majewski, a tail gunner, remained silent about his missions for the rest of his life, confessing that the fires he witnessed and the realization of civilian deaths, including women and children, were forever seared into his memory. He noted that in war, one must do what is necessary, but such actions inevitably leave a profound mark on the soul. The incendiary bombings of Japan were the culmination of evolving strategic bombing theory, industrial warfare, and technological advancements. Over 9 months, American forces dropped approximately 158,000 tons of bombs on Japanese cities, obliterating 175 square miles of urban area across 66 cities. This campaign resulted in the deaths of more Japanese civilians than 2 years of fierce ground combat in the Pacific Theater. Triumph of strategy in the skies, the history of bombing. Japan in World War II. The operation, conceived with meticulous care, bolstered by colossal industrial might and innovative tactical decisions, culminated in complete success. General Curtis LeMay, discarding established doctrines, ordered defensive armament removed from bombers and shifted to low-altitude flights, effectively doubling bombing efficiency in a single night. Concurrently, the development of napalm provided the Allies with a weapon perfectly suited for destroying Japanese cities, which were largely constructed of wood. This success, however, was overshadowed by deliberate attacks on the civilian population. While the dispersal of Japanese industry served as a formal justification, it could not morally excuse turning entire residential districts into ash. The architects of this strategy were aware that their actions would lead to mass civilian casualties, but continued their campaign, believing that the suffering of the populace would compel Japan to surrender. The testimonies of those who endured this horror lend a human dimension to the dry statistics that often dull our comprehension. Haruyo Nihi, pulled from a pile of bodies, Yoshiko Hashimoto, who found her mother's charred remains, Katsumoto Saito, who navigated through a fiery inferno. Their stories remind us of the true cost of industrial warfare. Behind abstract strategic calculations lie the tragedies of individuals, children who witness their parents turn into living torches before their very eyes. Tokyo, a modern metropolis, still bears the invisible scars of the horrific bombings. Where once fiery districts stood, today parks and wide avenues stretch. Memorial markers preserve the names of neighborhoods erased by the inferno. Those who survived the nightmare of those years still cannot escape the memories. The sound of sirens makes them shudder. The smell of roasted food causes nausea, and crimson sunsets instill an inexplicable fear. The tragedy deeply permeated Japanese society, influencing the formation of post-war pacifism and rapprochement with former adversaries. The triumph achieved by forcing capitulation without a ground invasion cannot overshadow the moral consequences. This military operation demonstrated that massive bombardments could destroy entire nations, yet it also called into question the acceptable limits of warfare. McNamara's words, uttered late in his life, "We acted like war criminals," reflect the irresolvable conflict between military expediency and universal morality. The incendiary bombing campaign became the largest-scale use of conventional weapons against civilian cities in human history. It demonstrated not only the colossal power of American industry, but also how warfare could descend to the level of cold-blooded massacre. The fires that engulfed Japanese cities dispelled illusions about the true nature of modern military conflicts. This was no longer a struggle between armies, but the methodical annihilation of entire populations. Japanese leadership in planning military operations could not have foreseen the destructive power of American napalm. They did not anticipate that this fiery rain would generate unprecedented temperatures capable of boiling river water, provoke cyclonic winds, and create fires that would consume oxygen even in the underground shelters. Japan had prepared for traditional warfare, but instead faced the total annihilation of its cities by an adversary whose industrial might was simply unfathomable. The legacy of these events continues to spark debate, and the moral questions remain open. However, the testimonies of survivors, collected over decades, ensure that the human cost is not forgotten. Shotomi Katsumoto wrote before his death, "I tell these stories not to evoke sympathy, but to warn. This is what war becomes when technology is used for destruction. May humanity never again allow such fires." Statistics present dry figures between 330,000 and 900,000 dead, 66 cities destroyed, 8.5 million rendered homeless. But behind these numbers lie tragic stories. Children orphaned overnight, families vanished in the flames, entire neighborhoods erased from the map. These tragic events marked a moment when warfare escalated to a qualitatively new, terrifying level. Humanity gained the capacity to wipe entire civilizations from the face of the earth, turning centuries of cultural achievements into ash in a single night. This monstrous power was first demonstrated over Tokyo on March 10, 1945, forever transforming the nature of war and expanding the boundaries of human destructive capability. The fiery inferno that engulfed Japanese cities became a precursor to the nuclear age, an era in which entire nations balance on the brink of total annihilation. The Japanese people witnessed the collapse of their former perceptions under the onslaught of all-consuming flames. Fire rained down from the heavens like a deluge, spread like water, and devoured everything in its path until entire cities vanished from the map.